What's up, everybody? This is the Ikesinspiration podcast, and today I have an interesting guest. I have David Ask on, and David is an entrepreneur and a singer who is passionate about personal growth. And so I'm glad to have David on because I feel like I can learn a lot from him, and we have a lot of similar interests in regards to building resiliently, becoming a better human, and just living life intentionally. So, David, thank you for coming on. And my first question that I have for you is, I noticed you're on a mission and you created a platform called Guardians of the Grit. Can you please talk about that and what's the mission behind that?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on here. So, yeah, I'm writing a book actually called Guardians of Grit, and my mission here is really to help dads become, just the tagline for the book, the working tagline is how to raise uncrushable young people.
Wow.
And, of course, the word grit, I think kind of sometimes gets misinterpreted. So I define grit as, the ability to do hard things, over a long period of time because it's worth it. And, obviously, for anybody to build a beautiful life for yourself and those you love, you're going to need to be able to do hard things. Life is hard. We see, of course, themes in, grit in nature and everything from breaking down muscle to building it back up. If you want to become stronger and build a better life, you're going to have to do, hard things and, metaphorically lift heavy things. And so that's something that I think is really important. The kind of my twist on this, though, is really to understand how do you build intrinsic, really true grit as opposed to extrinsic, grit, or extrinsically motivated grit, meaning, a lot of people end up doing hard things, but they don't do it for the right reasons. And they get really exhausted. They do it because of maybe they want to people please, or they do it for, they don't want to be embarrassed that they, didn't become somebody, or shame, or, insecurity and things. And so, my thing is what would it look like to be intrinsically motivated to do really hard things over a long period of time where you have that fuel that's, inside of you, as opposed to looking for the applause of others and things like that.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. I love the word intrinsic motivation. As I get older and older, I'm constantly asking myself, am I doing this for myself, or am I doing this to please others? And I've noticed that when I follow the path truest to myself, I find myself happier. In doing this podcast is a form of an intrinsic motivation. I don't get the greatest amount of views, and I'm not really making a lot of money from doing this, but I'm proud of myself for what I'm able to do on a consistent basis. So I'm hearing you talk about, raising young, uncrushable people. What does that look like? And are you a father too, David?
I am, yeah. So I've got a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, and Lisa and I've been married for 25 years, and my son is in his second year of college starting this week, and my daughter is in her senior year of high school now.
Wow.
And, but, I use that language uncrushable because, again, we're going to be knocked down, right? And some of us, everybody, no one escapes hard knocks, and some, of course, earlier in life, depending on what your home situation was like, right? Whether it was abuse or neglect or, just a bunch of chaos, a lot of people start out, kind of behind the curve, as it were.
Sure.
Right? They're battling. And so I think that I love the word uncrushable because, it's this idea that I'm going to get knocked down, but guess what? I'm going to get up again. And it's this idea of resiliency, right? Bouncing back quickly,
Sure.
but then also bouncing back, into a sense of mission. Hey, this is who I am. I have real clarity on who I am and why I do the things that I do. And I'm I'm on a mission to accomplish these things because they're very motivating to me. I care deeply about them. that the word passion comes from the word suffer.
Yes.
Like, what am I willing to suffer for? And I think you start to answer better questions about those internal, spaces in us. And it's amazing how you can kind of start, developing that sense of intrinsic and motivation. It turns into a lot of grit.
Yeah. I'm curious, David. You're a father, and right now I'm a single young male, and I aspire to be a father. I personally believe fatherhood is probably one of the most fulfilling things that a man can have, and something I would like to have in the future. Yeah. I'm curious, what has your experience with fatherhood been like, and what has being a father taught you about yourself?
Yeah, great question. So, growing up, I had I still do, a mom and a dad who were just really great people. They worked hard, they loved us well, and I of course I learned the majority of what it looked like to be a dad from my dad. And at the same time, of course, when I get out on my own, I left my parents' home 2 weeks after I graduated high school. And went to live in the town that I went to college in early, and then never moved home after that. Was married when I was 25. My son Parker was born when I was 30. And it was, some of it seems like you're flying by the seat of your pants, right? You're just kind of, especially those early years. And, the difficult things typically at that age, are kind of a lack of sleep and, trying to make a living and manage, little ones who are tearing into everything and stuff like that. But, I would say that, being a good parent, might be the hardest thing you'll ever do. Anybody can be a parent, right?
Yeah.
Anybody can father, typically, right? Can father whatever, someone, but to raise them, to cause them to rise, right? To raise somebody, that looks like something that is absolutely, if you're going to do it right, it looks very intentional. It looks very different. And you have to have a very, very clear understanding of who you are and why you do the things that you do so that you can pass those things on to your children.
Yeah. Interesting. You mentioned that being a parent is extremely difficult, or can be difficult to be a good parent. I'm just curious, like, why did you say that? Like, what makes being a parent, like, difficult? A good parent difficult?
Yeah, well, again, just not to kind of paint a bleak picture, but we see people who have children and they're provided for, right? They have clothing and shelter and food, but they're not provided for with regards to, hey, buddy, this is how we live life. People like us do things like this. Mm-hmm. There's not a real clear understanding of values and convictions and desired impact, on people around them. It's a lot of it is survival mode and seeking, things that are easier and pleasure as opposed to mission. And I believe we were made just like absolutely everything else that we can see, taste, and touch. We were made for a reason. And guess what? We as humans, of course, were made for a much higher reason. We're not, of course, our flesh and blood, but we're not animals, right? We have souls. We have conscious thought. We can actually think about our own thinking. Yeah. And I believe that we were made for a very, very specific reason. Each of us. We have a retina that's really different. We have a fingerprint that's different. And I think that our souls are very different. And so kind of a vague understanding, of who we are, toxic, but when you start dialing in on someone's, really unique qualities, right? And you start validating and pointing those things out and calling those things forth, right? Why are Parker and Kate different? Why was I different from my brother and sister? I don't know your story. I don't know if you have siblings, but, why are you different from them? And parents need to raise their children very differently because they're different people. They don't need or even require, all of the same types of things. And so I think that, by the way, this will drive the point home even more clear. My favorite quote is by Benjamin Disraeli. He says, the greatest good you can do for another is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own. And man, I love this idea. I love this idea of just mining for gold in somebody.
Wow.
Calling forth the unique and beautiful, courageous, strong qualities in somebody so that they can throw their head back and run, as opposed to try to blend in with the crowd.
Wow. When you said that quote, a quote of mine that popped up and actually is in regard to parenting is, the greatest burden of a child is the unlived life of a parent. And I heard that from a professor named like James Hollis. And it really struck a chord, because although I'm not a parent, I personally believe that a lot of the things that we as children or sons or daughters of we suffer from is what our parents were unable to do. So if they weren't really in tune with their mental health, sometimes that could be a struggle. If they're an alcoholic, it can kind of pass down to you. Or if they came from like a gang violent, thing, then it kind of starts to become your problem because you don't have a thing. Or if they're divorced, now you don't know what true love looks like, so you suffer with relationships. Or if your father is poor, you don't know what you don't have a healthy relationship with money, so now you're constantly battling how to make money. And so I feel like whatever like your parent is going through or hasn't really kind of mastered himself, it kind of just passes down to the kid. And so I feel like, although I'm not a parent, it makes me want to be a better person for my future kids. And I'm sure you think the same way as well.
No, it's a really good point. I mean, and of course, there's just, flat dead statistics, right, that show, people from broken homes, they have a harder time. And somebody who's, of course, you've been abused in some way and basically told by your parents that you're no good and you're a mistake and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's going to really ruin, start to ruin your psyche.
Yeah.
But just the opposite is true, right? When someone, looks at their kid and says, man, we planned on you.
Mm-hmm.
Like we prepared for you.
Yeah.
And you every day you're seeing them and saying something and raising them and correcting them and disciplining them and loving them and cuddling them and praying with them. And I mean, just the opposite is true, right? When you're raised, when you have that cradle of safety and nurturing and wisdom and so on, we see, of course, a large part, those people end up, rising rather quickly.
Yeah.
But if there's a vacancy, right? If there is indifference or some type of neglect or abuse, boy, man, that's tough stuff.
Yeah. And I was raised in an African household where my parents were very strict, but they were also very loving. And as I'm getting older and I'm starting to talk to other people, I'm realizing not everyone had the pleasure of being in a loving environment where they get to have parents who actually really care for them. Or like, at the time when my parents were being really strict and setting all these rules, I hated it, but it was really a form of love. And not everyone had that. And as I'm getting older, I'm becoming a lot more appreciative of it. Because it shows how much more loving I can be for others because they show me what love looked like for myself. But I feel like some people may lack that because of the parenting that they didn't, the good parenting they haven't received.
Yeah, and I think here's something else that I like to point out is there are a lot of parents who stay the course, right? But they don't have a lot of tools in their belt.
Yeah,
and they don't know how to do it, right? They know, okay, I'm not going to give up.
Yeah,
but yet they don't have a paradigm. They don't have a story. They don't have a an ethic. They don't have a value system or a paradigm that says, hey, people like us do things like this. I literally have shirts made, granted I did this several years ago when the kids were younger, but we have my last name is spelled like ask. It's pronounced Osk.
Yeah.
But we have Team Osk shirts because I want them to have an absolute clear understanding that as David Osk, the leader of my family, right, we have an absolutely clear understanding of what is not only right and wrong, but what is playful and good, what is, what our value systems, our values are, things like that. How do we make decisions? Well, we actually run the decisions through these types of values. And but a lot of parents out there, they're just trying to have their kids get good grades so that they can make a living. And it's just this kind of a self-seeking, pleasure-seeking, don't blow it type of an existence, as opposed to, hey, let me introduce you to yourself so that you can have a wonderfully, whatever your name is, right? David Osk shaped dent, in the universe here.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And so you talk about I'm curious, you talk about the paradigm or a guide to becoming for parents. And I'm curious what that guide looks like, because, I would imagine once you start becoming a parent, there's really no guide. There's no school for figuring this stuff out. And I know when I talk to my friends about who are parents, I'm like, what is it like? They're like, dude, I'm just figuring this out as I go. So I'm kind of curious, where does someone get that paradigm or that guide for okay, this is what I do? Or is there even a guide? Because the thing about life is we're so nuanced and so personalized. I feel like there's no one person for Ike or one person for David, what does that paradigm look like that you mentioned? What is
Well, a person is made up of mind, body, and spirit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we're sharing the same, kind of paradigm there, some people don't believe we have a spirit. Well, guess what? I absolutely believe that we have a spirit.
Yeah, I agree.
So here's what's fascinating is when you start to identify, which means write it down, right? If somebody asks you the right questions, what are your values? In the English language, there's, I don't know, 80 or so potential core values. So here's the funny thing, Ike. If you and I were to do a core values assessment, right? What does your core, the essence of who you are, value the most?
Yeah.
Well, if you were to put a check mark next to the values on the page, right, that resonate with you, then you were to narrow that down to 20, then you narrow that down to 10, then you narrow that down to 5. And you put those in priority, yours are going to be different than mine.
For sure.
And it's not that you don't have the rest, but again, there's a hierarchy of things that really stand out to you. But then you understand, okay, convictions, what's different than a value? Conviction is, what do I believe is right and wrong? What's a virtue? It's not a conviction or a value. A virtue is, what type of an outward focus do I want to have on other people? What type of impact do I want to have? And so you start identifying, right, this who you are, right? Identity. We use that word authenticity, by the way. The word authenticity comes from the word author.
Yeah.
You didn't make you, right? I mean, your parents, of course, got together and you came out, but you have a different soul, a different fingerprint, different retina scan, a different personality. So when you start to identify what God, who he made you to be, meaning you answer great questions and you start to identify those things, write those things down. That's your identity. That's the roadmap. That's your roadmap, right? Here's the cool thing about it. It starts to grow the more you hang out with people who I hope are wiser than you are, right? But that's the place to start. And that's exactly what I'm doing in the Guardians of Grit. We're going to introduce people to all of those things that make them them. So that a dad, right, can look at his son and say, hey, man, this is how I roll, and this is how we roll in my kingdom. People like us do things like this. I think that's Seth Godin. But then he as his child grows, right, and especially in those teen years when a teenager starts to kind of pull away and self-actualize, he starts to ask him, hey, man, what are your values? What do you think is right and wrong? What feels good to you? What is it? What is it that when you're doing it, gives you goosebumps? What do you believe is right and wrong? And here's the fascinating thing is, when we have a vague understanding of that, well, guess what? Whatever way the wind blows, meaning peer pressure, meaning social media, we're not going to have that inner plumb line or constitution to battle against what in a lot of cases can be complete nonsense. Yeah. And we're just going to want to fit in and not be an outsider. Yeah. Whereas when we've identified that stuff, now we can be agents of a clear constitution in a world where the wind is blowing, but we're not. Guess what? Those are the people where their joy skyrockets,
Yes.
their sense of fulfillment skyrockets,
Mm-hmm.
their sense of why, right?
Yeah.
If you've not started with who, your why is not even going to make
Oh,
sense.
yeah, for sure.
And all of that stuff really starts to build a natural, start to feel natural in your own skin, normal and genuine.
For sure.
Or if you haven't identified those things, what do you feel, right? Follow the clues. You start to feel anxious, depression, anxiety, avoidant, apathy, all that stuff. But when you when you laser in on those things that are just absolutely core to who you are and what you believe about values, convictions, virtues, and goosebumps, man, it's amazing how all of a sudden life starts taking on an entirely new paradigm. So I think that there is a map, and I think that God put that in you.
Mm. And you experience that happiness when you continue to be yourself. I had someone, a friend, a Christian friend, actually tell me this that was extremely profound. And he asked me, he's like, "Hey, do you know how to get to heaven?" And I was like, "I'm curious to hear your answer. What is it?" And he said, "The only way you can get to heaven is by being yourself." And I thought that was very profound. It was very simple, but I was like, that's the only way you can get to heaven, because God created us in His own image and likeness. And so to be anything but that means you're lying to yourself. And so I feel like we're on this forever journey trying to figure out who we are. And it's a tough journey, but it's a fun journey. But it sounds like for you, by you being able to develop that sense of awareness of yourself, you're placing it onto your kids, which is great. And I'm curious, like as I'm speaking to you, you're like clearly incredibly self-aware, which I like. I love talking to like self-aware, wise people. Where did your sense of self-awareness come from?
Well, so I think some of it is, you grew up in a family where those things are talked about, hopefully.
Yeah.
And then as you grow and you kind of live some life and you realize, man, I'm leaning on some things that are not nailed down, you kind of test the waters in some areas and you're like, man, that seemed to kind of help for a little while, but it's not solid enough. And you start to get the shovel out and dig. I don't believe in, relativism. I think that there are very constants in our lives, whether that's gravity or whether that's a moral, hierarchy of good and love. I think that those things are very understandable and you can nail them down and stand on big, heavy rocks to establish your life upon. So, but again, even recently, of course, hanging out with my friend, Dr. Andy Garrett, a lot of what I teach is based on his curriculum. It's just, it's just answering the right questions. And again, those things are, what do you believe about the one who created you? And it's really important, by the way, to establish that. If you have a vague understanding about the big marshmallow in the sky, it's, I think we can actually dig deeper and have way better answers.
Yeah.
It's going to affect how you believe, what you believe about yourself and everybody else. But then what do you believe about your own body, for that matter? And how do you treat it, and your mind? What is your mind capable of? How is your brain and your mind different? And it's really important to understand, some of those things. We can make up our minds, right? Our mind, our consciousness is very different than our brains, which our brains kind of handle, automatic functions and things like that. So I think quite often we just kind of let things, I'll just let it go. Just kind of on autopilot. And that is not a good way to live. You're going to find yourself chasing pleasure and happiness as opposed to purpose and fulfillment. And if you seek purpose and fulfillment based on what you value, you will find pleasure and happiness. But if you seek pleasure and happiness first, you're never going to find either of them.
Yeah. There's I forgot who said the quote, but there's a quote that says the unexamined life is a life worth not living. And and something I like to do is constantly like question why I'm doing something or what I'm doing it for.
Yeah.
I'm curious, for those who are who are intuitive, who like they're feeling the intuition and they're like something's not right, whether it's during a job situation that maybe it's not a deal, or they're in a relationship that doesn't feel fulfilling, or whatever activity they're currently doing that doesn't feel right. What are the questions that someone can ask themselves to, at least start in the right direction? What are questions that people should be asking themselves more?
Yeah. So I think it's, again, I think you start with values. What is
Sure.
it that is really core to what you think, because your decisions will be based upon your values. And, and then I think it's kind of neat. It's like, there's some different little hacks you can do. Like, what would you do if money were no object? Right? What is it that really lights you up? We hear that the term flow state, or being in the
Sure.
zone. What is it that if money were no object, what would you be doing? Who would you be helping? What type of an impact would you have? By the way, a purpose always is about impacting someone else. And if it's not that, I don't believe you have found a purpose. But if your purpose is about causing the people around you to thrive and grow, man, that's when life starts getting really, really good, because then you can see and literally be told, right, you had an impact on another human life.
Yeah.
And they can look back at you, and it might just be a wink, it might be a nod, or it might be, hey, Ike, your life really started to change mine. Like, that doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for you, what would you do if money was not a thing or as important to you? What would you be doing, and are you doing that? Like, what do you find brings you a lot of fulfillment and purpose?
Yeah. So, I have to say I'm doing it, and
Awesome.
I'm really grateful. I run my business, and, it's not like I need money. Don't get me wrong. At the same time, I've set up a business that gives me some extra time.
Awesome.
And, I sell thermostat guards, one called the Stat Guard Plus. It's in Home Depot and Lowe's and so on. But I'm able to, to largely focus on things that are, really give me a real sense of fulfillment, which is helping people understand, right? The greatest good is not to share with him your riches, but to reveal to him his own. And I really want people to establish, who am I, to celebrate and honor that, and pass that on to those younger than them. Whoever, I don't care if you're a mentor or a coach or whatever, of course, a parent, but that's my unique mission in life. When I think about what gives me goosebumps, and, when I feel like I'm in flow state, man, I love introducing people to themselves so that they can go do that for those under their care.
Yeah, I appreciate that mission. I think that mission is very, very needed. Because I personally think happiness is an eternal state. Nothing else is I don't think anything else can really dictate how happy you truly feel about yourself. And so I feel like that the mission of introducing yourself to who you really are, I think is needed, because I feel like in a world with so many intrinsic factors, especially social media, it can get so hard to really know what you really want to do. Like, am I doing it because I just saw a post on Instagram?
Yeah.
Or am I doing this because, this is what everyone is telling me what to do? I don't know. I've noticed that when I follow trends on social media and I start doing it, I don't find any fulfillment in it. But when I meditate, or something comes from me, truly within, or after a prayer, it tends to bring me a lot more fulfillment. So I'm glad. And, you mentioned you have a business that gives you the opportunity and the time to do what you love. Not everyone has that that power. And I have been able to build that for myself as well. And I'm still building that. But I'm curious, what is the vehicle that has allowed you to do what you really care about, because I think that's something that I'm currently going through, and I think a lot of men and women would like to do, because I think a lot of people are in jobs they don't care about, but they want to do something that they can't do.
And I want to say too, like, there's probably people listening that are like, these are first world problems.
Yes.
Like, oh, come on, David, get over yourself. Like, I'm sure there's people kind of rolling their eyes thinking, yeah, you get to do what you want. Well, let me paint a bit of a larger picture here. I'm 50, and it's taken me, decades to kind of figure that out. So we got to make something really clear here. We are not what we do, right? I'm not a human.
Yes.
I'm not a human doing. I'm a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And just because my occupation, maybe that which I make money, happens to be selling thermostat guards, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. That's not who I am, right?
Yeah.
If I were a plumber, right? I'm not a plumber, right? I'm David Osk, and there's other things that I can, when I express myself inside of the context of my job or various other things, that's what brings us fulfillment. Your job is a context, for you to be yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that, we don't live in a utopia. We live in a world where, hey, life can be hard. We got to make money. Depending on where you live in the world. There's some people looking for fresh water and food today, right? Let alone, finding a career that seems fulfilling.
Yeah.
But tell me this, does that mean that they cease to exist?
No,
they can still, and we can too, whether you're battling cancer or, whatever it is, you can still, have a real great sense of fulfillment, loving people and expressing yourself in a way that has a beautiful impact on others.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree, man. And I've seen this truth when I actually went to Africa. I was born in Nigeria, and I went there back home for vacation. And I've noticed that although people in Nigeria have way less than Americans, I've noticed, in my opinion, that they are much more happier and fulfilled. And that was very interesting to me. Like,
that is interesting.
Yeah, I remember I was in a vacation. I was like, what do you guys do here all day long? Like, because I'm in America, like, there's so many things around.
Yeah.
And my cousin was like, dude, we just laugh and make jokes all day. And I'm like, okay. I was like, cool. And I felt very Americanized, but it was so beautiful to see the simplicity of what brings them joy. And it seems like you're uncovering that. And so I'm curious, man, like, what has been your biggest entrepreneurial success been, David? And what has that win taught you about yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, face value, I've got a product in 3,700 retail stores.
Oh, wow.
But here's something fascinating. I'll get vulnerable here. So I thought, when I started this business, 10 years ago that, man, I just wanted success so badly.
Yeah.
And if I got it, that somehow I was going to feel like I was
the king,
somebody, or at least I was not a nobody.
Yeah.
And you know what? It does not solve any problems. I'm so thankful that God, has given me the opportunity to pay, raise my family and pay the bills and help my kids with college and things like that. I mean, beyond measure. At the same time, it really didn't solve any problems.
Yeah.
Or that big question mark that I had in me. And of course, what I landed on is that I believe, that the good King of the universe, God, loves me, and that he made me in His image as a king with a little k, right, who has a kingdom, right, and whatever is in my sphere of influence, and to manage that kingdom really, really well. And and again, my kingdom is my house, and maybe whatever room I'm in, because I try to make sure that if I'm in a space, right, that things are happening as they should. People are being nice and, kind and whatever else. But when I manage my little kingdom with love and honesty and wisdom and dignity and courage and light, man, it's amazing how, that sense of, whose I am and who I am, really starts to resonate and makes me, just brings that sense of fulfillment and peace. But when I start thinking that I am the king with a capital K and all of these things, right, the stuff that I want, and I want the applause of other people, that kind of stuff, I think somehow that's going to satisfy. Well, we know that doesn't. I mean, look at Michael Jackson and Elvis Presley and, everybody else who had the applause of the entire world and everything they could, quote unquote, ever want. But yet life was unlivable.
Yeah.
We need love. We need delight. We need friendship. We need purpose.
Yeah, I love that. And time and time, I see countless examples of great people like whether it's Kobe Bryant or just people on my podcast whatnot, I've noticed that whenever they have a huge goal and they accomplishment, the feeling that they thought was gonna happen wasn't as great as they imagined, you know. And so it's always that constant reminder to appreciate the journey. And so, do you have like a specific example in your life where you had this large goal and you're like, man, like I've been working on this for years or however long, then you'll reach it and you're like, oh man, this isn't what I thought it was gonna be.
So, it's funny. This has been 14 years ago.
Yeah.
We bought some land and built a house. And, and I was thinking, man, if I literally, and I built, maybe a third or close to half of this house myself. And I thought, I'm going to have such a real sense of satisfaction. Well, I built it up to be, no pun intended, built it up to be something that it just really wasn't, Yeah. And Tim Keller says, when you make a good thing an ultimate thing, it crushes you. But when you let an ultimate thing remain an ultimate thing, then you can enjoy it. And let a good thing remain a good thing. So I think I had expectations about the satisfaction, right? Or whatever this house would do for me when I finished it. And I realized, nope, it's bricks and mortar, and it's a place to do relationships. It's a place to love and be loved. That's it.
Yeah. It's interesting how our expectations can let us down, and then it starts to beg the question: where does our expectations come from? But that's a whole nother thing. And I'm also kind of curious to like learn like what is because you seem like a man who has a lot of beliefs and convictions and values, which I appreciate. What is a unconventional belief or controversial thought that you may have that is not too popular in today's world?
Controversial. I think it might go back to what I said earlier about this idea of authenticity.
Okay.
It goes back, we get that word from the word author. So when we, especially in the land of the free and the home of the brave, right, we just realize, wait a second, I didn't choose my personality. You choose what you do with it. Yeah. Right? I didn't choose my skin color, my eye color, any of it, but I get to choose what I do with it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important to understand that, there's some humility around that. And that humility is really important because if we start to fight against, who we were created to be, right? When we start denying, whether it's our physical attributes or anything else, boy, we have so much internal conflict. Yeah. When we just honor, hey, this is who I am, right? These are the things that I like. Everything from I like chocolate ice cream more than vanilla to I like Andrea Bocelli more than I like AC/DC, right? I mean, there's so many things about our personalities and the things that we like, and we think that we came up with that. Well, not really. And how do we know that's true like gravity? Because when we have children, they come out of the gate really hardwired. They're very different from, I'm talking weeks old. You can tell they're little spirits, and even twins, right? They're very different. They might look similar on the surface, but what makes them cry, what makes them laugh, all of that stuff, is so unique at a very early age. I mean, day one. And little kids are not thinking about thinking. Little kids aren't thinking about, I'm trying to be authentic and share my identity with the whole world, right? Yeah. They're just doing their deal until they get hurt, right? And then they start questioning everything. Am I good enough? Am I enough? And that's where the parents need to say, of course you're enough. You're more than enough. And I want to get behind whatever is inside of you and lift it up.
Yeah. And that's why I'm so excited to be a parent, because I love kids and I love the spirit of kids. I feel like kids are just unconditionally themselves. Yeah. And not only are they unconditionally themselves, like all they want to do is love their parents. Like that's literally all they want. They want your validation. They want your love. And you don't it's kind of sad, but you don't have that relationship with too many people in the world. So when you do have that relationship, you really want to cherish it. And so, the kids are so beautiful. And the thing I love about kids is they're not embarrassed. Like they're not afraid to be themselves, ask questions. But then it's sad because somewhere around life, as we get older, we become, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of when we become a teenager, maybe 14, 15, we just start to become so much more conscious of what everyone is thinking about us, and we become more anxious. And I don't know the science behind it, but then we start to lose more of ourselves. And I'm wondering what's that about? Yeah,
and you nailed it. So psychologists call that stage the stage of self-actualization. So that, roughly that, maybe 13-ish to maybe 25. Yeah. You're literally the reason there's tension at home and teenagers kind of push the limits and so on is because, they're looking for boundaries. They're looking for something to stand upon, and they're testing the waters. Hey, is what I believe important, and can I stand on my own 2 feet? So you're literally pulling away from all of this love and care, and you're saying, can I stand on my own feet? And it's really important, that parents know. I mean, parents need to realize that's really an important phase.
Yeah.
And to, assuming they're not hurting themselves or anybody, let them fall down, let them get skinned up, because they need to bump up against those things that are immovable. And they realize where the boundaries are. And so once you self-actualize, right, then you stand on your own 2 feet. But it's really important to do that through a values-based lens.
Yeah. And I'm familiar with the term self-actualization. And correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of what self-actualization is, like, you're becoming like the greatest version of yourself. And I'm wondering, like, what does that mean, like, for young people? Like, because people, like you mentioned in psychology, like, people start to self-actualize at 13. I didn't know that was like a specific age. I thought that was...
Well, it's roughly. There's...
Cool. Okay, cool. So that's something that, like, is an ongoing process. Yeah, man, and like, I agree, man. So I'm glad that you're sharing this opportunity. And
hey, can I make a comment? You mentioned self-actualization, becoming the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
So here's a funny thing, and this is where, and I'm being kind of funny and facetious here, but truth of the matter is when you're 13 to 25,
yeah,
you have all the confidence in the world.
Yeah.
But actually, and I say this about myself, and of course my kids would laugh, you're pretty ignorant, kind of dumb.
Yeah.
So the best version of you is by no means, that doesn't devalue who you are, but the best version of you is not when you're, 15 to 25.
Yeah.
The best version of you is when you have fallen down time and time again and been humbled to the place where you kind of surrender to what is actually immovable and unshakable about the world and yourself, and you start becoming that person. So I would say that, the best people I know are the people who have suffered, and they're usually old.
Interesting. And my favorite people on my podcast are the ones who can share stories of them suffering and their vulnerabilities, because I can relate to their suffering. And you said that suffering humbles you. And a quote that has just been banging on my head, like, because I'm on this entrepreneurial journey and it's growing me a lot, is there's a Bible verse, and it says, those who exalt themselves will be humbled, but those who humble themselves will be exalted. Yeah. And it's like, wow, I need to be more humble, but then it's like, how do you humble yourself? Because I'm curious, you are a parent, and do you want your kids to suffer? Like, do you want, because I feel like we get humbled by traumatic events that happen that we didn't intend to happen.
Yeah.
But you said that's kind of what makes a man a better person. So do you want that in your kids? Like, do you want them to suffer?
Well, there are levels of suffering, right?
Yeah.
Of course. Like, if my son, when there's young, touches a hot stove, I'm okay with that. He needs to know that don't do that again. So there are some things that when you suffer, or guess what? You start picking on somebody and they punch you in the nose.
Yeah.
That's some darn good suffering right there. I would say that most suffering, if you suffer well and you learn from it, right, and you don't become bitter and let your ego get in the way, man, those can be some of the best teachers in life. If you start a business and it fails,
yeah, and
you get up and try again, right? You suffered well. That's the point.
Yeah.
But it's like grief. The term good grief. There is such thing as a good grief, but again, it's suffering well. And I think that we can't avoid it. You have to embrace it. Get ready. Life is hard. Get a helmet and some Kevlar and get ready to take some hits, because you're going to. And those of us who shelter our kids from suffering are not doing them a good service.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, are you intentional about exposing them to that in some way, or do you just let it happen? I'm just...
Well, it's age appropriate, right?
Yeah.
If my kid's on the playground and he's up on the jungle gym, and he's 2, I'm not going to let him go too high.
Yeah.
Right. But you know what? If he falls from 4 feet up and gets the wind knocked out of him, he's going to hold on a little tighter next time. So it's it's age appropriate. I'm not going to
Yeah.
throw my kids to the wolves.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think that, I mean, of course, you hear really horror stories where people, take things too far in either direction. But I think it's, age appropriate is where it's at.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I'm thinking when I was asking that question, like people in like their 20s or their like teens. But yeah, of course, a little kid like that, you don't want to put them in harm. Another question I have for you that I'm curious to learn, David, is, I personally believe that like a lot of us, every human being has limiting beliefs that we grew up with, or that take us away from being the best version of ourselves. Whether it was we learned them in our family, or we just learned it from a certain culture, or just wherever. Like we all have these limiting beliefs that stop us from really achieving what we want to do, or just being our best selves.
Yep.
What is a limiting belief that you have that you're currently are learning or working to unlearn?
It's funny you say that. I literally was talking to a friend of mine about that this morning, and I think, so the limiting belief is this: that I'm not going to matter enough. Like my life, my life will have gone by, and no one will have, felt my impact, or I won't be remembered. There's something in there but here's the funny thing. I think I take that too far because I overcommit, and I sometimes fall into, helping too many people or people pleasing. And
yeah,
so I think that, I think that's I didn't realize that till recently, honestly.
And I'm curious, what made you realize that, and why do you feel like sometimes your presence won't matter as much?
Yeah, so I don't know necessarily why. The reason I realized it was my friend Quentin actually called me out. Oh. And so I'm part of a mastermind group where men get together and just help each other.
Yeah.
And professionally and personally. And he challenged me one day, and he said, I wonder if you've got something else going on inside of your heart, because you tend to have very poor boundaries. Like you seem like you're helping a lot of people, and you give them carte blanche access to texting and phone and, kind of thing. And not carte blanche, but, like during the day, there's a lot of interactions, and it comes from a good place, right?
Yeah.
I love to help people. At the same time, the more I thought about it, and it kind of took me all summer to kind of realize, I think there's a fear in me that I'm not going to matter enough. And I'm not sure quite where that comes from, but I'm still kind of working on that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because sometimes, I think it's something that we all think about, and it's essentially you just questioning our purpose. And it's funny that you mentioned the cell phone thing, because I did see your like phone number just okay. I did see your phone number up and online. Yeah. I was like, wow, why is he leaving his phone? I thought that was a little weird, but I mean, it's whatever, cool. Like, because usually, but I guess it does go to his point. But at least you're doing it from a loving place. It's not like you're trying.
Well, right. And here's the funny thing, and this is, I think in the past, to be in a public forum like this, and it would be really hard to even talk about some of those vulnerable things. And then I'm realizing, here's what I think is the secret sauce, though, is the more vulnerable that we are with one another, it's like we're giving permission for someone else to feel safe.
Yes.
You
can heal yourself, So I'm glad that you shared that limiting belief, because that's not something I would have expected someone like you to say. But thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you got it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, David, honestly, man, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I learned so much about self-awareness. I've gained wisdom, and I learned a lot about parenting, and something I hope to do in the future. If someone wants to reach out to you, learn more about you, or learn about your works with the Guardians of the Grit, how can people do that?
Yeah, I would say visit guardiansofgrit.com. We're not launched yet, but you can sign up for the email notification when we do, or visit my website, like davidask.com.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on. I wish you best of luck with your parenting, your business, and all your future endeavors.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right.